Welcome back to Book Break! In today's video we are going to be talking about the classic books that you never knew were so funny, and I'm here today in a gorgeous bookshop settled in front of a very cosy fire. This is Jarndyce, which is a bookshop in London that specialises in 18th and 19th century books. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them in a minute, but as Jarndyce is a Dickensian reference, it's named after the central court case in Bleak House, I thought where best to start than with Charles Dickens as a writer that you never knew was so funny. So the first book I'm going to mention isn't obviously a comedy, it's actually a rather sad life story, but this is David Copperfield, and if you've seen the recent film or even just the trailer for the film, you will see that they have definitely brought out the comic aspect in it. It's got loads of comic actors like Hugh Laurie in it, and the trailer is just a laugh a minute. I went to see the film and it really is brilliant. It manages to turn every disaster into a comic moment, but while also keeping you caring so much and being so invested in the characters. And one of the writers of the film pointed out that turning it into a comedy really isn't that much of a stretch, because Dickens as a writer is genuinely very funny, and a lot of the other adaptations of David Copperfield took out the comedy because it doesn't particularly carry the story, but actually they think it's really valuable and is really what brings Dickens's writing to life. I mean, look at the original title for David Copperfield. The full title is actually The Personal History, Adventures, Experience and Observation of David Copperfield the Younger of Blunderstone Rookery, which he never meant to publish on any account. So that's already very tongue-in-cheek. And David Copperfield is the one that has the very famous character of Betsy Trotwood, who's this hilarious figure based on a real friend from Dickens's own life. In fact, a lot of this book is quite autobiographical. And Betsy Trotwood is this complete man-hater who stormed out of the room when David was born because she didn't want to be godmother to a boy, but she does later take him in, and she's always chasing donkeys off her lawn. She's this very grumpy character but with a heart of gold. And this is our Macmillan Collector's Library edition, but I've just been looking in the shop at an incredible first edition which has all of the separate installments put together in one set, because that's how Dickens first wrote it. It was serialised. A more obviously funny Dickens is The Pickwick Papers, which was Dickens's first novel. So this one actually started as a series of captions. So an illustrator called Robert Seymour created a series of engravings of sporting life, and the 24-year-old Charles Dickens was employed to write the funny kind of slapstick captions for them. But increasingly, Dickens's narrative started to shape the story rather than the other way around, and eventually Dickens just took over the project and The Pickwick Papers was born. And while we're talking about Dickens being funny, there's one more that I have to mention, even if it's not quite the right time of year, and that's A Christmas Carol. The opening to this book really showcases quite how funny Dickens can be, even if the rest of the book goes on to be pretty scary and then very sentimental. I reread this book this Christmas and was laughing so much at this opening. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. And then he just rambles on about the different types of nails that might be considered more dead than a doornail. It's almost P.G. Wodehouse-esque, it really is so funny. So basically, you don't need to be intimidated by Charles Dickens. You might find that his writing actually takes you by surprise. Now, another new film that's been taking people by surprise that's upcoming soon is a new adaptation of Emma by Jane Austen. So the trailer very much calls it Jane Austen's beloved comedy, which is exactly how I've always thought of Jane Austen's books. I really do think they are comedies, but that's not the way a lot of people are taught to think about them at school. But Emma is the inspiration behind the film Clueless. It's a rom-com, and Emma gets into all the same kind of hilarious scrapes that Cher does in Clueless, trying to set up her friends who aren't right for each other, constantly misreading the situation, and just generally making everything so much worse. And Jane Austen writes the most hilarious characters. So in Emma alone, we get Mr. Woodhouse, who's Emma's father and a hypochondriac to the extreme. He's scared of basically all food and weather and all situations, and thinks that everyone else is just suffering through everything they claim to enjoy. And there's also Mrs. Elton, who's this completely ridiculous, kind of vulgar woman who never stops talking. One of my favourite scenes in the book is when they go strawberry picking, and Mrs. Elton's rambling on about strawberries takes up like half a page, and you literally see her wearing herself out with talking. It's hilarious. And that's not even mentioning some of Jane Austen's funniest characters from other books, like the incredibly rude Mr. Palmer in Sense and Sensibility, who was played by Hugh Laurie in their film adaptation there, the very pretentious Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice, and even the good characters get made fun of. No one is safe from Jane Austen's scathing wit. Now, a book with a title that's become almost more famous than the book itself is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This is a very long book and it's set during World War II, which might put off some people who are intimidated by classics, but that is only because they don't yet know how darkly funny this book is. The whole book is a satire of the politics of war, using increasingly ridiculous and exaggerated rules and policies encountered by our main character, Captain John Yossarian, whose main mission throughout the book is just to stay alive. And the catch-22 of the novel is this policy where the only way to get out of flying with the Air Force is if you are crazy and therefore it's unsafe. But if you declare yourself crazy and unsafe to fly, you're demonstrating a rational mind and therefore you're not crazy and have to fly. Catch-22. And then a book that was initially a parody but has actually outlived the books that it was making fun of and become funny in its own right is Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. So this was written in the 30s and is a parody of the very romanticised accounts of rural life that were very popular at that time. So our heroine here is Flora Post, who decides to take advantage of the fact that there are no societal rules about how much you are and aren't allowed to impose on your own relatives, and so she sets off to stay with her relatives on Cold Comfort Farm in Sussex. And of course each of the farm's inhabitants have their own deep emotional problems and the farm is really badly run, so Flora has to come in with her 20th century values and modern sensibilities and fix all of their problems. And you don't have to have read or even know anything about the type of books that this one is making fun of. The weird and wonderful characters are just fun on their own. Now, Diary of a Nobody by George and Whedon Grossmith was described by Evelyn Waugh as the funniest book in the world, and seeing as I find Evelyn Waugh's books some of the funniest in the world, that is very high praise. So Diary of a Nobody chronicles just over a year in the life of Charles Pooter, who is this middle-aged, middle-class clerk in the City of London who considers himself above almost everyone else around him. And Pooter's totally unself-aware arrogance and quite how seriously he takes himself is the basis for just how funny this book is, as well as the frequent times that his delusions about himself are punctured by various embarrassing social gaffes. And then, as I mentioned, Evelyn Waugh, his book Vile Bodies is one of my favourite funny classics. Though again, like a lot of the other books on this list, it can be very sad. So it's set in the period between the wars, though interestingly, it was written before World War II started, and yet it predicts that another war is coming. And it satirises the bright young things who were very popular partying in London during that time, as well as the press who reported on their every move. And the first half is much more light-hearted, much more in keeping with the style of Waugh's previous book, Decline and Fall, whereas the second half has this notable shift to be much more depressing. And Evelyn Waugh said that was due to the fact that his marriage broke down while he was writing it, and you really can see the shift, and yet the book keeps this dark humour going the whole way through. And Vile Bodies is funny on so many levels. So you've got these completely ridiculous characters and situations, you've got Evelyn Waugh's fantastic turn of phrase and hilarious way of describing people, but also a lot of the humour comes from quite how short and sharp he is. So some of the saddest moments in the book are told in this really jarringly matter-of-fact way, which kind of makes you laugh in surprise at them. And finally, back to a very old classic, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So everyone's heard of these, but might not really know anything about them, especially the fact that a lot of them are very funny and quite raunchy. So The Miller's Tale, for example, is a completely ridiculous story involving lots of fart jokes and bare bottoms hanging out of windows, and The Summoner's Tale is basically one long fart joke. I think that's pretty much what they found funny in the Middle Ages. So I'd love to know your favourite funny classics, especially the books that you weren't expecting to make you laugh when you went into them. Do leave a comment below and let us know your recommendations. And then do definitely come and pay Jarndyce a visit. This is this really incredible bookshop with a huge range of books for classic lovers and collectors, from really valuable first editions to much more affordable ones, and even facsimiles of first editions. And it's just, if you love classics, or even if you're just getting started with loving classics, it's just such a beautiful shop to browse around. I've been having such a nice time here this morning. So leave a book emoji in the comments to let us know you're going to come and visit, and also do hit that subscribe button below for new videos every week. Coming up next week, we're talking about our favourite steamy books, so get excited for that. And in the meantime, you can always go and follow us over on Instagram at BookBreakUK. See you next time.